Mabrika, welcome. Anin. My name is Reaiah True, and I'm here and welcoming you on behalf of Michigan Family Farms Conference 2022. Thanks for joining us. This is the Land Back, Land Access, Rights to Stewardship panel discussion. Joining me is Katy, Brisette, and Jerry Jondreau of Dynamite Hill Farms, and Nbiish Kenwabikise, a treaty rights fisherman, the youngest captain of the Great Lakes. Thank you again for joining. And today we're hoping to touch in on a deep subject, land back. What does that mean and how does it play out? What is the status of how things stand today as far as land access, land rights, water rights, and how that is incorporated between a couple of the parties involved, particularly the land succession plans for those farmers who are up in age and looking to transfer their land to other farmers who may not have family members that are interested in carrying on that family legacy. Important to touch in on, and the purpose of this panel discussion is the land back movement. What does that mean? And again, how does that play out? We're looking at strategies that would be incorporated in the process in the state of Michigan region and in the Great Lakes, various ways that are sustainable to see that a more sustainable and positive forward motion as far as stewardship to the land and the water in the region. During this segment, again, we're going to discuss what land back and land access means, particularly in the Indigenous population. Land back refers to the land that was taken. And for the other members that are looking to steward in the Black and African American farmer group, we're calling this land access in regard to the fact that we honor that this land was originally stolen from Indigenous peoples. So right now we're going to take a moment and introduce the panelists. So we'll start. I see, Katy, you have joined us on your iPhone. So if you would like to start by introducing yourself and let the people know your relationship to land stewardship.
Bonjour, Kina. Mangin dote, Miss Kobekanga Dunjiba. Makunza Banyan Baba, Banan Shnabi, and Kaza Banyan says, Zigonika and Dashnakas. Wenjibaya and Miss all Asianisido Toman or Shnabi and Nadazirin, Migo Asianisido Toman or Gay Babaya and Coman Shnabi or King. So my name is Katy Brisette. I'm a member of the Red Cliff Band of the Exterior, Anishinaabe, and I'm a Loon Clan member from my community. I live here in the Keweenaw Bay with my partner, Jerry Jondreau. And I guess a part of all of those introductions and the way I tend to introduce myself, the way I was taught, is because all of the things that come from this land, from my people, from the people who have raised me, from all of those determine my relationship with this space. And so being a member of the Red Cliff Band, I was born and raised on Lake Superior. A Loon Clan member, I'm someone who was raised by another individual who learned how to use my words and use those in a powerful way. And the understanding of who I am as an Anishinaabe, Kwe, as an Ojibwe woman, comes from my upbringing where I was very fortunate to have been raised amongst not only my own community members, but people all across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Canada, and so that's what I was explaining. And my introduction is that who I am comes from this place. I'm very fortunate. My feet walk in the places that my ancestors were raised. The words that I use as an Anishinaabe woman are the words of this place as well. And all of that sets the foundation for how I understand myself here. I can continue, but I should give space for other people too. So I'll mute and go. I'm working right now, speaking of being a farmer and being in that farm place, I'm in the middle of getting all of our stuff ready for sugar season. We're in the middle of our sugaring operations out here right now. So I'll be on mute and listening until I get called upon.
All right. Thank you so much for the beautiful introduction to yourself and the language. It just feels so good to hear it spoken and to get to experience it more. So thank you, Hahom. Jerry, would you like to introduce yourself and express to the people your relationship to land stewardship?
Yeah, sure. So bizhiw gakina Gidigaa bizhiw Indigenous Jijak and Dudam Wiikwedong and Ojuban Ojibwe Anishinaabe and Dao. So my name is Jerry Jondreau. I'm from the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community, or the Lance Bay Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, aka Ojibwe, also known as Wiikwedong in our language. The bay, the place by the lake. I come from the Crane clan, and yeah, Katy and I are partners, and we work together here to remember our place in the land, and we're doing that by way of producing food again, and more traditional foods in a manner that we feel is regenerative, restorative, and in our perspective is culturally appropriate. At Dynamite Hill Farms here, we've been going like full time since 2019. My past has been involved with my tribe's natural resources department for, I think it's been about probably close to 15 years now. After that, I moved on and pursued a degree in forestry, because our reservation is the largest forested reservation in the state of Michigan. And we have yet to have our own people actually manage the land. I don't like the term manage, but that's what people understand. It's been managed by the BIA since the Indian Reorganization Act. And so I was encouraged to go back to school to get a degree in forestry and start the tribal forestry program here on our reservation, to actually have an opportunity to let our culture sort of inform the decisions that we make upon our land for the 7 generations, and to recognize the inherent sovereignty and agency of our relatives that also exist here in this landscape, and to not treat the land like a grocery store necessarily, or like a shopping store, but as other beings that exist in this space with us. And I always sort of fall back. I always sort of fall back on some old stories, and I see Roger's on here. Roger tells a story often about this original treaty, and sort of our place in that as Anishinaabe people, as the ones who rely upon everything else that's here. And our responsibility is is to help care for everything that's around us, so that they can continue to take care of us as people. And that really shifts the paradigm when you think about what management is. It's not that human beings are the pinnacle or the apex of existence, and as a matter of fact, we're sort of at the bottom of everything, and we rely upon everything that's around us. And in order to live that good life, that minnow bama daziwin, we have to recognize that where our place is, and really what our responsibilities are to this land. And so we're actively trying to do that with our farm. I don't even really think we're necessarily a farm, but that's, again, the term that everyone sort of understands. And we have a business, but it's not necessarily in the sense of what everyone thinks of a business today. We do participate in capitalism to an extent, because we have a mortgage here and we have to pay our bills, but we do this for our community, for our people, for these trees, to share these foods again, to make these foods more common and more accessible, the knowledge and how to do these things more accessible to our people and our community, and to share those gifts with everyone that's interested in participating alongside us. I don't think that we're experts in anything, really. We're learning, just like everybody is. And I know that at times, as people like start getting back into their culture, start reclaiming their identity, that sometimes we feel bad for that, like we're not good enough. But in reality, we're all sort of on this journey of learning our entire time here. So we try to make this place as open as possible to those that are willing to walk that path with us and to share with us, and learn from us. So it's that's in balance too. So we mainly focus on maple products. We're really focusing on maple sugar, but we do bottle syrup. We also make a maple vinegar. We also exercise our rights in the surrounding ceded territory, and we harvest from the land. One example is wild leeks. We're very gentle in that process and very selective in how we harvest. The places that we harvest from, if another person came up behind us, it'd be hard to tell that we were even there. So being gentle in the landscape, and then also ricing season, the Minoman season. I go over to Minnesota and I spend about a month or a month and a half, depending on the season, living out there and harvesting, knocking rice and processing rice, and then I bring that back to our community here. And in between all of that, we're raising a family. We homeschool some of our kids, and we have a lot of conversations. We talk about a lot of these things, and then we also like to show a lot of these things and take people out into these spaces and tell these stories, because that's really where they come alive. So yeah, we do a lot of things here with what we're working on, but mainly it's trying to rebuild that relationship between our people and the land again. So I'll leave it there. Miigwech.
That's so beautiful. You guys do a really great job. And I know that in the times that I've met you, I've really enjoyed your presence and the way that you shine it out and are representing it everywhere. For this.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting some connection issues. Can y'all hear me? Okay, cool. Nbiish, Nbiish, Kenwabikise, Indigenous, it's my name. Nina Michelle Mistodem is Ajijak, which is Crane Clan. And then Nina Nokomis is Dodem is Nashika. So I'm Turtle Clan too. Yeah. I'm from Beaver Island. My family's been in commercial fishing for forever, really. Actually, some nets have been carbon dated from our islands to be over 7,000 years old. And so, yeah, my family's been in commercial fishing forever. My grandparents have fought for it in the Ottawa Association, which was like pre-federal recognition for tribes. And so that's where a lot of people, Anishinaabe people, fought for our treaty fishing rights before we even had like official tribal recognized rights. So people would shoot at Native people. My family's been shot at a lot, and there's even more recent stories about treaty fishing people getting shot at. My nets have been messed with. I have 2 commercial fishing tugs from the 1940s. So just to kind of correct what Reaiah said earlier, you know, I don't know if I'm the youngest commercial fishing captain in the Great Lakes, but commercial fishing like tug, 25-ton tug operator. So I have 2 1940s tugs that I'm restoring. One is the Ruby Ann, which my uncle owned and fished for a long time. And then I also bought the Wabbamong, which I bought from another guy who's retiring. And my life's work has kind of been in the commercial fishing world. Grew up around boats and tugs and different vessels that operate different net styles. And I've gone to school for welding and heavy equipment engineering so that I can fix all the tugs and different vessels that all the other fishing families need work done on. So right now, most people, the work is so expensive, most people haven't been able to afford getting the work done. So I need it too. So I went to school for that, and I'm continuing my education because I want to eventually get a law degree and work towards our fishing rights. There's documented, like historically, all sorts of different fishing styles and easier fishing styles, so people wouldn't need vessels and the costs of maintaining vessels. There's traditional styles called seine nets and all sorts of different things where like even an elder and, you know, a grandchild could work from the shore in a small boat, you know, and feed themselves or the community. Yeah, I've kind of been working in the commercial fishing world as a means of kind of laying back and boosting the economy for Anishinaabe people and practicing our treaty rights that our ancestors fought and died for, and my family has risked their lives for. And it's the second most dangerous job in the world by fatality rates. I've lost 4 family members, and I've experienced that. So I'd really like to help in the engineering mechanical side and maintaining and teaching people how to maintain their vessels so that we can keep that going as an economic means for ourselves, which is highly regulated. So we are actually the first defense against overpopulation of invasive species, and you know, all our fishing rates are highly regulated so that there's no overfishing. You know, that's why it's been overturned to treaty rights fishermen. But that's kind of my story on all this. Miigwech.
Nice. Home for sharing, and for your efforts to keep it going, and thanks for the correction too, just in case. So I'll take a moment and share a little bit about myself as well. Again, my name is Reaiah True, and I am of the Taíno Nation, so Taíno Daka. The region is the Caribbean that Taíno people are from. And at the time that Columbus came to this part of the world, he and the ships landed in Quisqueya, which is the original name in the Indigenous language of the island that is shared by the Dominican Republic and Haiti. It's my understanding that, so many people, everyone knows about Columbus, but if you ask them the name of the indigenous peoples that were first interacted with, many do not know the name of the Taíno people. So this is an important piece to me, and a thought came to my mind that it feels like an honor to have been asked to host the panel with this subject being that this colonization came by way of Columbus and through the gatekeepers of the Taíno people. So as being a descendant of those ancestors, may this conversation and these efforts be forwarded, that the healing may continue and indeed reach these lands and the Caribbean as well. So I've been asked to host and to moderate this panel with the ask to share a little bit of my story. And in moving around the United States, I was born overseas, grew up in San Diego, was involved in my first garden in Texas, then bounced around the country a little bit and landed here in Michigan in 2005. I started a small garden and had just bought seeds from the grocery store, learned about the Terminator seeds that winter when I had tried saving the seeds. And in the spring, I met a couple ladies who had been running the West Michigan Seed Exchange. The core person that hosted the Seed Exchange traveled around the world a lot and eventually passed that project on to me to host, to keep it in this area. So the heirloom seeds has been such a rejuvenating piece to my life. And it's been interesting to see the correlation to my history and heritage in that my family, I come from the De La Cruz, which was obviously a Spanish assignment of a name when the Spaniards came to the islands. But the De La Cruz family were so integral to the region and owned thousands upon thousands of acres, or had thousands upon thousands of acres, that they had planted coffee and tobacco and many other types of produce, and stewarded that. And an oil company found oil under the coffee land in the early 60s and seized it, and also killed off a large portion of the family when they tried to take up arms. So the land back, I've had a lot of different people ask these questions. What does it look like? So we're going to go ahead and move into that. And this question I'd like to pose to everyone on the panel: what is land back, and what does it look like to you? How does it play out? Do you want to continue in the same order as we started and continue?
Katy's gonna pass right now. We've been working like crazy. It's sugar season, and there's so much work to do. I don't think either one of us have eaten yet today, so it's crazy. It's crazy right now. No, but it's to be expected. It's kind of the way we operate anyways. There's a lot going on. I guess I can try to address that question. I know it's a big question. I don't think it's something that I've fully wrapped my head around yet either. But I think a way, I think maybe there's 2 points I can try and make. Number one, I think it's addressing this misconception that as tribal people, one of the things that we have and we have access to is land. And that's not necessarily true. I know Nbiish had mentioned that, we're highly regulated, and that's true on the water and on the land, where I believe we're the most regulated people in this country. And while we may have reservations, depending on which reservation you're on, I mean, some of those reservations are really, really small. And like I had mentioned, we have the largest forested reservation, I think the largest reservation in the state of Michigan. And even we have issues with access to land. I mean, our own people police ourselves too, along with the BIA, the federal government in general, facing violence and racism. There was a friend of mine over in Wisconsin that I believe it was last spearing season, he was shot at. And so those are real issues that we face every season, every year. And so the lack of access to land is a big issue for our people. A lot of our folks don't own land within our reservations. There's a lot of people that live within like housing projects, for example. And a lot of the other reservation land has been taken out of tribal ownership through multiple different channels, a lot of them not very nice, I guess is a way to put it. And so even though, we have constitutionally protected rights to the land, there are so many hurdles that are put in front of our people that it's difficult to exercise those rights. And so I just wanted to make that statement, because people may be thinking that, as tribal people, we have access to all kinds of land, and that's just not the case. I think, maybe another point to make about land back is, any way you look at this movement, if the land is not going back to tribes and to tribal ownership, it's the continued process of the colonial system removing us from the lands. And I mean that in the best possible way, not to discourage any other group of people in this country from trying to pursue that. But, in the state of Michigan, where we are today, the entire state was ceded to the United States government via treaties, the entire state. And so when there's opportunities for land to return back to tribal ownership, or just being returned in any sort of way, I think the first people that should have rights to those lands, in my opinion, is Indigenous people. And it's not to say that, we wouldn't be willing to work with the other BIPOC communities and how to utilize that land. But I think looking at history and the way things have happened, I think it's important that the tribes have the first shot at land being returned. I think if you look at the history of this state, if anyone has looked at land alteration since colonization, the diversion of water systems, the draining of wetlands, and the damage that's been done to this place, and then you continue that on to the urbanization of some of these spaces. Then you look at resource extraction, and you look at mining, for example, in my community, where we were hot in the middle of the copper rush back in the late 1800s, and following that, and also at the same time, it was the timber barons that were coming through and clear cutting all of our forests. And through those extractive economies, they've left a lot of disaster in their wake, and not only on the landscape, but also in our lakes as well. There's a lot of claim to Lake Superior being the cleanest water in the world and stuff like that, and that's really not true. My community, I know, firsthand that the fish that's out there is heavy with mercury. The smelt that run are recently there was a notice that went out as like an advisory of consuming smelt because of what is the PFAS that's in the water right now. And so even when my partner Katy was pregnant with with any of our children, really, she can't eat those fish from the water because of those issues. And as people that are of this place, and people that have permanency based on the reservation system, I think it's really time for that authority and that responsibility to return back to the tribes. We've been taking care of this place for a very, very long time, and it was an incredible place. And in a short span of time, we're dealing with water crises. We're dealing with pollution. We're dealing with Superfund sites now. I mean, the stories of, there was rivers on fire downstate, and so I think, and this may be a controversial statement, but I don't think that the state is capable of taking care of this place, to be honest. And now as we start thinking about these issues like climate change, right, and droughts, and crazy timing within a seasonality of things, I think it's time for our people to reclaim that authority again, to reclaim that, I don't even know if authority is the right word, but reclaim that responsibility again to take care of this place. And in doing so, and all the work that all these tribes do in the state of Michigan, it really is about restoration and trying to take care of this place. And in doing that, it's not just a benefit to the tribal community, it's also a benefit to the non-tribal people.
To everyone.
It's to everybody. And so I think when we're dealing with a crisis like this on this scale, on a global scale, to when there's land that's available to be returned, I think the tribe should have the first access to that space, so that we can take care of it again, for future generations, because we're here for the long term. Our outlook is 7 generations plus, and those decisions that we make today, we know that they're going to have impacts, on our children and grandchildren. And it's not just about how much that we can gain right now, how much money we can gain in this boom and bust sort of economy that's laid waste to a lot of areas in the state. We're in it for the long haul. And I think that for a lot of tribal people, I obviously don't speak for all tribal people, not in any way, shape, or form, but I think a lot of our people are willing to work with people that have a similar sort of mentality, of taking care of this place. And so that's kind of where I stand a little bit with land back, is if there's anything that's up for a return, I think first and foremost, it should be an option for the tribe, so that we can start reclaiming some of the space again and those responsibilities to care for it.
I definitely hear you. And I think that makes sense, and to refer to the Indigenous population for the wisdom as to how to best care for the lands is important also in moving forward. And Nbiish, to go to you, to the, what is land back? How does it look to you? How would it play out?
Well, I'd like to, well, as you mentioned earlier, about the treaties, right? You know, Michigan was a huge, Michigan was a huge, like a critical infrastructural spot for you know, the competing like colonies or whatever, you know. So this is a really big piece of land, you know, because it was how people could get resources to the middle of the country from you know, directly from where, like, Europe area and stuff. So you know, my great grandpa signed the 1836 and 50s treaty, you know, after fighting in the war, and you know, the US was just trying to kill everyone. You know, that's not that far removed from my family. And then my grandpa, you know, and grandma, they went through the boarding schools, you know, taken from their homes when they were kids and abused. And then my grandpa, you know, was you know, the Beaver Island families, we were, you know, people would come to where we are and have ceremony, you know, from all over the country, and all the nations. You know, we have a stone circle that's like a quarter mile wide. It's two circles that one charts the sun through the year and one charts the moon through the year. You know, and people would, you know, it's a special spot. And so we fought for our rights to live there, instead of just being killed off, you know. And so the land that was left over to us, to my grandpa, you know, my dad's dad, which for a lot of people, they're still alive, even people in their hundreds, up or in their 90s, you know. So we owned, or he owned, you know, the entire east side still of Beaver Island. And if you get into legal histories, especially Native legal histories, and books and accounts of that, there's preemption, which is where supposedly it's kind of like squatters' rights, and there'd be all this native land for sale, you know, and it would be advertised as no natives here still, you know, and people would be allowed to just take large chunks of lands without ever having seen the land. So even after the treaties, it was just blatantly stolen. And with my grandfather's land, which is literally like multi-millions of dollars worth of real estate today. Like the one family from the island I'm from, their father, the older man that's alive there today, their father forged my grandfather's signature in signing over all of that land for nothing. And that was a pretty common thing all through the early 1900s, late 1800s, and mid 1900s. So, and you know, the government was planning on just getting rid of us however they could, you know. We only got our language rights in the 90s, you know. So my father lived his whole life with the language being federally illegal, you know, and the majority of his life with it being federally illegal. So, you know, land back to me would be just court case in which the entire east side of the island, which my grandfather's name was falsified, would be, reallocated to us in some way, or payments could be remade to our entire family for what all of that real estate's worth. And that's not including all of our resources that have been scraped from the ground, and all the water that's been poisoned, and all the lands that have been poisoned, So land back, it's a really complicated subject. And for my family alone, it's just another piece of many of the stories that are well documented in the legal world and Michigan legal histories and books within like the native legal histories. So land back would be, just for starters, just the real estate worth, because I've had to live as a homeless student to get my degrees and my education. We had nothing. My father and family went through the boarding schools, so they were all abused and traumatized, and so I've had to work so much more harder just to have any look of normalcy for my people's future, my kids' future. When I have to watch on social media the kids of these families just like parade around and goof off with their lives and drink and drug and just kind of do goofy things that aren't contributing to like the world or people or BIPOC or Indigenous people. It's just blatant waste of our land and resources in our faces still today. So land back to me would just be a start of a just case, a publicized, documented, reviewable case in which just the real estate worth of what was stolen from my grandfather is worth. Because my family suffered, and we watch these people today still sell all of our lands, and resell it to each other, and just are well off. So land back is complicated, but even if we have to operate in a system that's here today, land back, for starters, definitely looks like cases, redistribution of wealth and resources and real estate. Stolen real estate.
Nice.
Documented, well documented, So thank
you for going deeper, for going deeper on that, because it is complicated. It is a big question. But it needs to be asked, and the process definitely, we've been hearing that it has begun in some areas of the country where some lands have been allocated back. Now, the number one piece that I've been hearing about is the land transfer of farmers, so land access in succession planning and land transfer of farmers who, again, don't have family members that want to continue on the family farm, and in the hopes that this process can be embedded in the Indigenous population for the region, and then from there allocated to other partners who are willing to be at the table, looking at various ways and means of sustainable agriculture, equitable agriculture. And it's an interesting thing too, because in the Indigenous population, ownership wasn't the design. It was more about the relationship with the land and each other. So that's where leaning more into the stewardship word more so than farming, because of these designations and where the status currently stands in legalities, and again, these terms and how that plays out. My original hope for this panel, again, I was just asked to moderate and host this panel. And in the process of trying to put it together, it brought up a lot of big questions for me, because personally, my family's land in the Dominican Republic, that was also just taken, and people were killed over it. The family, much of the family, is in denial still. Just all of the disarray that it caused have left ripples that, I'm a generation that was born that I didn't even know about my Indigenous roots until much later in my life. So I've been learning while my indigeneity has still come up through my DNA, and I've felt inclined to learn how to clean a fish and how to grow my food and be more responsible in my relationship with food and water and the land. So it's interesting to me to see how we will navigate forward. So I say all this because I feel like I'm a good representative of what has been taken and the feeling of disarray, and my passion for the land and for perpetuating healthy seed for myself and future generations. And at the same time, there is a where do I go from here question. So I was initially hoping that our panel would have some lawyers and some people that could speak to what is the process. And I know, Katy, you had spoken of someone that you know who actually has the form that we can refer further questions to and follow up on the process of how to actually adapt some land transfer processes for those who are looking to either transfer land and have, see to it that it is continued to be farmed. One of the fruits that have come out of this panel discussion is the hopes to be a bridge between the communities, the Indigenous communities, the BIPOC community, and some of these farmers that may not be part of the BIPOC community that have lands that they're willing to relinquish, and they want to see that food is grown. So it's so important, and the fact that that piece is there, is present, is so beautiful to me, that it doesn't need to be a battleless situation. It can be a transfer out of honor that the Indigenous people know what to do and do have in mind the benefit of the whole. So Katy, I know you and Jerry and like 18 others worked on the document of the forest adaptation resources. And I was wondering if there are any points that from your work together, are there any simple adaptable practices that the general listener might be able to begin activating? And just for an example, the compost pile was one that I was really chanting for a minute for some years, and then now I hear other people chanting compost, compost, compost. So it spreads. So anything that your findings as a resource group to pass on to the general listener?
Yeah, so to go back a little bit to the previous question, I sometimes think of things a bit differently than most people do. And so I'll kind of blend that thoughts that I was having into what you're talking about right now. As I was listening to the other two speak, I was remembering some of the first conversations that I heard as a young person, as a little girl, traveling around Nbiish and understanding, learning how to understand myself here in these places, was the conversations that my father used to have. And there was a saying he used to kind of articulate. He was doing a lot of this work fighting during the treaty rights era, and he's one of those OG environmentalists who was learning and living during times that when the rivers were on fire, right? When before there were things like EPA and regulations and things that we are all benefiting from at this point in time, at the very least, you know, the talk of policy, if not the follow through. And so one of the things he would make a statement, especially during that treaty rights era, he would always say, like, do you all understand that we're fighting over poisoned fish, right? Like, do you understand that we're in a time that we're being pitted against each other for a purpose, for a reason. And it is to distract us and to keep us from truly making some of these bigger steps that are necessary. And I was reminded of that listening previously and understanding that the reason why I was called to language and culture, I myself, my background is in education and working with our young people, and then the evolution of that into being called and reminded to work home, to raise my children, and to raise myself, and to be a partner and a person of place, came from that call from language and culture. The language itself will tell you, it will explain to you what is necessary and what you need to do. Our stories, I heard Nbiish and what he had said about, you know, we've got carbon dated nets here from 7,000 years ago. And you can't necessarily carbon date our words, but those stories go back to time immemorial. And the stories and the conversations, Jerry and I were just speaking on this when we were talking about, you know, the climate reports that are coming out and the direness of our time right now. We did this already. We have the stories that talk about what happened to the people, what happened to those who don't listen and don't hear. And when people talk about land back, we're still centralizing ourselves as people, right? Like, we're still saying that I as a human have the right to demand this land for myself. And it troubles me, that conversation sometimes troubles me, because when I think of language and I think of our culture, I'm just articulating to you all with the words that I've been blessed to be a part of. But that language is a translation from here, from this place, from the rocks that tell us the stories, from the trees that have told us what to do, from the languages that have been perpetuated through the water and the beings who all came before us. Jerry always makes mention of, like, you know, the teachers are still here, like the people who have taught us as to how to be in this place, they still exist. The only people who aren't present are us. We are the ones who don't listen. We're not there. We don't belong. We don't feel that we belong in that classroom any longer. And the one thing about being an Anishinaabe and an Ojibwe woman is, at the very least, when I speak, when I have a voice and I have a language that tells the story of what to do, of where to be, of how to think in a way that more closely reflects what happens right here. And so I struggle sometimes with this idea of like, what does land back mean? Because we can talk about like, okay, well, give me some land, right? Like, let's Jerry and I have more land, have more access to land, because if we have more access, then we can do the work that we need to do. Truth. Give the land back to my children or my community. I mean, I come from a place where, I mean, we got 14 miles of like total of how much we get to have access to land. I leave Red Cliff to access what I need to, and as a ceded territory, as a participant in the ceded territory, I have to leave my home, and that's why I know how to travel. And Jerry makes a point, like as Anishinaabe people, like we're bound to our reservations. I don't get to be Ojibwe. If whatever happens comes here, I can get a permit from the Keweenaw Bay community, leaving Red Cliff. But if I need to go when the maple trees decide to leave, because they're not going to stay here in this region, I don't get to be Ojibwe when I leave here. According to the Canadian government or any other person who like will politic and decide that for me. And so as we're talking about like tools, what are tools that we can do? What are something simple? What is it that I could do to at least participate in what's happening around here? And that the first tool, and we talk about the tribal adaptation menu. I can put the link to it here in the chat as soon as I'm done speaking. But the first tool that we list in one of our first strategies that we talk about, and then the opening to the conversation is, you have the tools around you if you look to the people who are here. And that's what, when you think about what land back means, it means listening to the folks who have held on for dear life, to continue and perpetuate the stories and the conversations, the lessons and the teachings that come from this space specifically. And so when we implemented the tribal adaptation menu, and the menu itself takes a long time to describe and to participate in. It's a beautiful tool that was developed by quite a few of us and continues to live and breathe as a document to help people understand, like, how can I, as a person not from a tribal community, better work alongside a community when facing something like climate change and adaptation. What could I do in that time, in that space? There are lots of specific strategies in there, like, well, you could think about your infrastructure and how could you consider like making sure that the trout have flowage space so that they have spawning when implementing a new road, right? There are very specific and concrete examples of things that help you understand that maybe when I'm considering the impacts on fish, maybe I need to consider my overstory in the spawning rivers so that the rivers stay cool enough so that those fish have the ability to stay alive in some of their most vulnerable times. We have provided specific strategies such as that, but the first 4 of those strategies encourage, support, and really expect people to go to their local tribes. So if you live in the ceded territory, you live near a tribe. You live near people who have, if you live here in Michigan, you live near a tribe, and you live near people who have, not only have they done the work for thousands of years to learn and understand this place, even through assimilation and even through our governing policies, even through the few tools that are working at this time. I mean, we have natural resources department that have been dealing with climate change and working and looking at these changes for decades now. When the first scientists called to alarm what is going to happen in this place, our people were some of the first people who answered. And so one of the things that folks do not feel comfortable with or don't understand or don't know is to you need to start developing it and building those relationships. You need to start understanding that those relationships have already been built, and you don't need to recreate the wheel. There are things that are being implemented right near where you are, right where you've been hoping and dreaming and maybe waking up to hearing and understanding, that have been going on for decades, centuries, millennium. So how do you participate in those relationships that already exist? And taking it upon yourself to be a bit humble and step into a place that you're not going to understand and you won't necessarily be able to translate, but understanding that maybe there are people there who have been doing this work for such a long time. That is always our first step. We actually don't even start working with people who want to use the menu until a tribal community or partnership has already been developed, and the tribe says, this is what I would like in order to help support what we're doing, because this is not new. The only people who are new to this conversation are the folks who are waking up right now. I mean, these are conversations that have been going on. We have a prophecy that talked about, I mean, that we moved to this region because we knew this was going to happen. And so pretending that this is a new conversation, that this is something that we have to deal with now that we're in crisis mode, that's just because it's only just happening for you in your sphere now. This is something that we've been doing for a long, long time. And all the words that you're hearing from us, all the things that we're saying right now, I heard Nbiish talk about his ancestors, his grandparents, his fathers, you know, all the people who've influenced him. Jerry and I talk about it all the time. We only are just using our voices now because we have had the opportunity to be told before. And so I think that's kind of maybe where I was going with everything. If you have any additional questions or anything, just let me know. But that's your first tool. I say would start there.
Nice. I love that you said how to understand myself here, because we have a lot of different frames of reference of ourselves, especially in relation to the environment we grow up in, and to come to that inner and center point of self in relation to our own spirit and being is such a special thing. And also to have that grounded center point and then relating to the environment around us and everyone else is also so important and beautiful. So thank you so much for everything you've shared on this. And I know I touched on it, but I kind of lumped a couple questions in when I asked you yours. But you had mentioned that there was a woman that has the form in regard to land transfer. And so I just wanted to make mention that if there are any questions in relation to that, and if any listeners out there know of farmers that are looking to have their land governed and farmed, and they don't know how to access resources of farmers, please do reach out. You can make a comment in the chat below the video, and this video will continue to be posted on the MIFS website. So this can be accessed, and we will follow up in the future. Jerry, I'd like to turn the question to you, and this is a big one, so do with it what you feel, because there are a lot of pieces to all that exists. And if you would just share with the listeners about the situation you expressed in the original interview about the land that is deeded to your family, that your property sits next to, that you don't have access to. So what is the discrepancy that keeps you from occupying the land that is deeded to your family?
Yeah, so that's getting into basically what describes a checkerboard reservation, where you have a lot of different ownership types within the reservation itself. And so it's not, you know, like some commune where it's a free for all and everyone's holding hands and skipping through the woods. There are all kinds of hurdles put in place, as I mentioned before. When our tribe signed the Treaty of 1842, sometimes called the Copper Treaty, that essentially opened up access. Well, I guess the interpretation of those treaties is still another contentious point too. But essentially that opened up the copper industry and the timber industry, which also led to the Treaty of 1854 that established the permanent reservation boundaries that we still know today. There's also issues with that. I mean, how they allocated that land and determined the boundaries. And we had bands of people that were all over the place, right? We weren't just like some central community. We had bands of people all around here. And when they created those reservations, they basically lumped us all into like a prisoner of war camp. What's interesting about that Treaty of 1854, though, is they actually allotted all the land within the reservation boundaries to families, and anything that was deemed excess according to their standards was taken. And so now you have a large block of land that was privatized, essentially, where tribes owned the title to whatever land they were allotted. That really opened up a lot of theft that took place during that time. A lot of bad loans that were given out, and to people that really didn't have anything. And when they would give out those bad loans, the way that people would get their payment was to essentially just take the land. And so still to this day, I'm not a fan of loans. And even in agriculture and, you know, the Michigan Farming Conference and stuff like that, there's all kinds of ag loans that are out there right now. But I'm here to tell you right now that I'm not going to participate in that, because I know what happened the last time. That was the thing, right? Like when you give these loans to people, and if we can't, we're broke. That's another thing that you should understand. And, you know, we don't have generational wealth. We don't have a trust fund. And so everything that we have, you know, we've really had to work for, and it can be taken away too. Like, we know that as well. So I know I'm kind of going off topic here, but I'll get back to it, I swear.
No, you're on point, because it is the realities that exist of our day to day, that these are the effects of what has happened. And it is a daily process. You don't get a break. I don't get a break from the history. I don't have parents to fall back on, to call up when my car stops running. I don't have, you know, all of these things that are normalcy for a lot of other people. And that's partly where this conversation is important, because we're looking at what are the realities of where things stand. In order for us to get to healing, we need to go back to the sore in order to get to the root cause, and go from there. And so it's not a comfortable, this is not a like, yay, this is how we go about it, this is how it goes discussion. We're really just at this cracking it open, and we do need to look at the issues that stand, because even with the indigenous tribes, what about the people like myself who have no card? The federal government just revoked the acknowledging Taino people as a nation at all, when just some people just got their card. You know, how do we get past these legalities that are really just standing in our way, and standing in the way of the progress that would bring ease to everyone, because everyone needs to eat.
Yeah, and I think there's so many things that I want to talk about that I don't know if there's going to be enough time to do it, but all these things are interconnected. And one thing to say about, like, you know, the legality of these things, right? And how do we get these things back? Well, I'm not even a fan of adjudicating these issues in the oppressor's court system, right? Like, I don't think that's fair either. There should be a third party, right, that looks at these things, and not necessarily the United States court system. And, you know, my family, we also come from some legal battle backgrounds related to the Jondreau decision, which was the first treaty rights victory, to my knowledge, in the country. But it was fought in the state courts, and it should have never been fought in the state courts. But so the ramifications weren't as wide as they could have been, but it did set a precedent for a lot of these other court cases that came after that, that ended up in favor of the tribes. But going back to the whole loan thing, right? And if we're talking about land back, and what protections are we going to have in place for those people that may actually benefit from some of these programs where this land is returned to the tribes, or returned to the BIPOC community? What sort of safeguards are we going to have in place for those people that may have never had that, the luxury of owning land, right? And taxes and maintaining that, and the ins and outs of that whole system. Because I'm worried that, you know, if this program, you know, starts rolling out, and this land starts going back to BIPOC communities, how fast are they going to take that land away from them as well, by bad loans, right? These things that have happened in the past, or defaulting on your taxes, or something along those lines, right? So what other safeguards can be a part of this conversation, if this is going to be a real thing? Getting back to land ownership in this allotment situation here on my reservation. So this land that we actually own, so I actually bought this from my aunt, who had bought it from a non-tribal person who I think a couple ownership before that, you know, had acquired it from tribal people in the past. And so this land, we own 30 acres within the reservation, which is rare. Like, people should understand that, like, tribal people actually owning land within the reservation is rare. But right behind my property, there's allotted land. So it's tribal land with an allotment status. And that land was actually allotted to my relative back in 1854. And so myself and my family now are considered heirs to that allotment. But what's happened since that land was allotted is that as the subsequent generations and ownership continues, they just basically fractionated that land throughout the families. And so now I can't recall exactly how many allottees are on that land, but it's somewhere between 150 and 200 people. And the tribe itself actually owns an interest in that land. There was a land buyback program. I want to say maybe back in the 90s or early 2000s, where tribes were actually buying this fractionated interest from tribal members to sort of consolidate the ownership to just the tribe itself. But the fact that my family today is an heir to that land, and it's literally in my backyard, like my property line ends and then this allotment begins that, you know, my family is heir to. I can't just go back there and utilize the land. Again, you know, we're the most policed people in this country, because not only do we get it from the states and the counties and the federal jurisdictions, but we also get it from our own people, our own councils, and our own law enforcement and conservation officers, and you name it,
who are also in fear of having their powers revoked if they're not enforcing things in a certain way. So it is extra. It's a double up on that enforcement.
Over the oversight. Yeah, it's crazy. And so now, you know, I've been pushing for this, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, like as a tribal forester, like I was really pushing for making it easier for our people to access land. And the BIA still has a lot of jurisdiction over what's considered trust land. And they didn't even have a permit that was available for tribal people to, let's say, sugar, right, on those lands. So that's, as I mentioned before, that's another one of our large, like, big food sources. But the BIA had never actually gone through the process of understanding us as a people and our culture to permit something like that. And so we had to create that here within our community. And the BIA at the time did not even want me going back there, because the person who was in charge at that time had said that when we tapped those trees, that we're actually devaluing the first log. And so their relationship with this land has always been about extraction from, like, a timber perspective. And not to say that I'm not extracting things. I mean, we're extracting sap, but this is something that's renewable. This is something that can be done every single year. You cut that tree now, you push it back, you know, that cultural opportunity another 75 years out. And so we've had to, like, really forge our way to create that space for our people to do these things again. And I don't think the general public understands that. I mean, the amount of fights that we have to go through on a regular basis just to exist is crazy. And then the fact that so I can sugar those trees back there now. Finally, I think this is the second year, maybe the third year that we've been able to get a permit to go sugar those trees, but it's completely political. So the council itself has to approve that permit every single year, and every single year we have elections within our council, and, you know, new faces come in, new ideas, new priorities come in, and if all of a sudden allowing these permits to exist are no longer a priority within my community, well, then there goes my access, right? So how much can I even invest in our little business that we have here? Can I go out and buy a large evaporator so that I can handle more sap? Well, if I do that and I make that investment and then they pull that permit from me, I'm screwed yet again. And if I bought that evaporator by way of loan, I'm doubly screwed.
Very screwed.
Right.
Yep.
So these are risks and things that your average sugar producer in the country, in the United States, and I would even say Canada, like, they don't even have to really worry about that. Not to say that that's not a struggle for other people, but there are other externalities that are out there that make these things, this return back to the land, this return back to these foods and this production and these responsibilities, that much more challenging and difficult. And so I'm always encouraged when I see people that are doing it, right? Like our fishermen or our fisherwomen that are still doing these things, the few people that are still sugaring in my community, and that's slowly, you know, more and more every single year, but we're nowhere near the capacity that we have been historically. And I really hope that one day we can see that again. We can realize that again, that we have our people on the land and on the water again, and participating in this again and taking care of this place. So I think I answered your question.
I think you did too. And thank you. So may this be an official call for grace among the people who have the generational wealth and the generational haves, that may you take some time to realize that the benefit that you've lived from having what was taken has continued to cost the people who it has been taken from. And so, for those who are in a position that are looking to have their land continue to be farmed and food to be produced on it, this is an official call to reach out to the local Indigenous tribes. And if you need a facilitator, feel free to reach out. put a comment in the comment box below, and we will follow up to facilitate, to see to it that you can be in touch with your local regional Indigenous tribe and get the lands working again for everyone, because everyone needs to eat. So now, Nbiish, I want to turn the question to you. Obviously, the ancient practice of feeding people ties into land back, and so your presence in that is super important. What would you say is the greatest need for your industry of treaty rights fishing, and or, so however you want to answer this question, for a sustainable land transfer to be successful?
Could I just hear it again? So just to repeat back, is
Sure.
how land access has to do with commercial fishing or in treaty rights fishing and
Right. I guess I'm pitching two questions to you. So whatever you feel most inclined to answer. How does the ancient practice of feeding people through fishing tie into land back, and or what is the greatest need that you see
So I would say that you know, fishing in the Great Lakes, especially, just as I had said earlier with our nets, having some of our nets having been carbon to be over 7,000 years old. You know, it's a means of not just providing food for generations. You know, my grandfather and grandmother were able to have 14 kids and feed all of them through commercial fishing, as well as produce you know, enough money in racist times where people wouldn't hire neighbors for work. We have land when things were very racist, even after having the majority of it stolen through a false, you know, signatories. So that just for other families, like what I want to kind of fight for eventually, or, you know, maybe there could be some work towards that outside of my own goals. But, you know, there's a lot of documentation about other practices of our fishing. Like I was saying earlier about the seine nets, that's basically similar to gill nets, is a net that you could tie to a tree on shore, and, you know, somebody could go out with their like, you know, small G-mon or like a canoe or something, and get fish to either smoke, salt, dry, you know, for long-term food, or to sell, you know, as a means to produce wealth, you know, at a generational scale, so that, you know, we have an easier time to get an education. You know, it contributes to so much, as far as, not that wealth is everything, but if the world has to operate the way it is, you know, it's important, you know, for that distribution from things that our ancestors fought and died for, you know, and survived and won. You know, you don't treaty defeated people. You know, you make treaties to people because you gave up, and, you know, so it's important, you know, that land access is important, and just for as the means for anybody right now, if you were to get like your spearing license. You know, unfortunately, other than just having a federal card, you know, I can, with my tribe, I have to get an additional license to go spear. And that's in a limited area within Michigan, unfortunately, Michigan, and you know, on top of that, all of my family, including myself, have all experienced, you know, racism, and general neglect for the law from police officers, even about our rights. You know, we've been harassed, and my cousin up north had to call tribal police because the local officer involved didn't believe he had the right to spear where he was spearing, you know, to feed him and his son, and practice our rights. And so our officers had to get involved to the point where they had to threaten the local officer of arresting him because they have federal authority, and confiscating the police car. And so his superiors had to, you know, tell him to back away. So the general neglect for the actual law that's supposed to be, you know, operating in the system that we live in, really sucks for Native people. You know, on top of, more recently, there was a thing in Detroit where, you know, people were practicing their rights with sapping, and an officer blatantly said, you know, something along the lines of that treaty rights stuff isn't valid, which, you know, it's a federal authority. We exist as federal organizations. I operate, you know, under federal authority. You know, I'm governed by people who have, you know, federal authority, who can arrest local officers for harassment, you know. So the general neglect and negligence of the law that exists, that we have to operate under, you know, that really affects our ability to access our people's lands, our ancestors' lands, you know, that we fought for and survived for, and want to feed ourselves with. You know, we don't do it in an unsustainable way. You know, commercial, non-native commercial fishermen in the Great Lakes pull millions of pounds of fish every year, and they're allowed to do netting styles that we're not allowed to do, like dredging, which completely pulls every species. It destroys the bottom ecosystem. You know, they're allowed to do stuff that we're not allowed to do, that is harmful. You know, and they pull out more fish. You know, so and that's verifiable. You can go look at state documents and federal documents. You could FOIA, you know, the authority that you could FOIA. I know they have to have what's the natural resources officers here in Michigan? DNR. Yeah, you could FOIA the DNR, because I know they have to have a DNR officer there to verify the species that they catch. You know, they pull out more fish than we do and destroy the ecosystem in ways that we won't do and don't do. You know, gill netting is something that my ancestors have obviously done for 3 times older than the length of Christianity has existed. You know, on top of that, you know, Jesus was supposed to be a gill netter. You know, we've been doing that here. You know, so we don't even have access. Like,
even the letter
without
J is only a
harassment.
200-year-old letter.
Yeah, so we get harassed over what we're supposed to have the right to already, you know. So is that really having the right to the land? You know, is that really is it really access or accessible? You know, we can't even have ceremony on state land, which is supposed to be, you know, in we have the treaty right to practice our ceremonial rights on land that's been ceded and non-ceded land, you know, within state lands also. However, people will get sent to prison for that, you know, because it's federally illegal if you don't get the tribe that you're a part of to write an acknowledgement of you doing that ceremony, you know, on our own land. So is that really access to it either? You know, if they install a council person who has non-traditional a non-traditional agenda, you know, because my tribe has that. We had a council person who thought that our traditional ways was just like, you know, a very colonized mind, you know, and he just had very nasty things to say about our traditional ways, you know. So do we really have access to the lands that we're supposed to have access to then to perform ceremony or hold ceremony, you know? So that to me isn't really access, you know, especially if your tribe has been, you know, intersected or the voting systems. You know, our tribes are, our councils all over the nation are known to be corrupted, and murders and all sorts of crazy, terrible things happen around installing puppets in our tribes councils, you know, to change our laws and to manipulate and deny, you know, our rights. So, you know, I feel like we don't really have access, you know, even though I can go get, you know, a signed thing from my tribe to go hold a sweat on state land, which I'm supposed to be able to do through our treaty rights. You know, if one or majority of council people are non-traditional, are victims of the boarding schools, you know, and they don't believe in those ways, and they deny my right, deny that you know, that certification, you know, or whatever, that's not really access. I don't have access to that, to the lands that I'm supposed to access. And with the harassment, just with anyone trying to spearfish, let alone not being able to practice all the ways that are known for us, documented traditionally, historically, and through state, you know, legislature and all sorts of stuff, you know. We don't have true access like we're supposed to, and especially to our traditional ways, you know. While non-traditional fishing people and operations can use environmentally destructive, you know, fishing means, you know. So just being able to feed ourselves just by spearing, you know, fish feed is a lot. You know, I ate fish every day. You know, I operated a fish market for about 4 years, you know, and I felt good. That's my natural diet from the islands. That's the best I've ever felt health-wise. And not having to pay and spend all my food at the grocery store on the island, which is really expensive, where it's mostly elderly, retired, wealthy people who live there, who can afford everything that's there, you know. That's the only way that, you know, Native people could live there, you know, is dealing with our traditional ways, is feeding themselves our traditional ways, you know, not having to be, you know, subjected to economically like restrictive places, you know. Like we should be able to feed ourselves and not have to worry about going to an expensive grocery store in a place that I'm supposed to have traditional access, federal access to on many levels. You know, I can't just go live on the side of a beach and river and, you know, in a sustainable way, you know, in a non-destructive, non-impactful way. You know, I can't go live a traditional life, you know. So I don't really have access. You know, I can't go to my tribe, especially if it's a majority of colonized ideologies, you know, of council people, and get a permit to go live in a traditional way within our own territories that are legally acknowledged to this day, you know. You know, we're supposed to have the right to be on so many feet off the side of any body of water in any river, you know. That's definitely not a thing. You can't do that without getting shot at, without getting harassed by the police, you know, like without having to get the federal authorities involved, you know. We have to be harassed and get a whole nother authority level involved to even have, you know, to feel safe on any level. So that isn't really access. So there needs to be a whole reconstruction of like, or funding of just the Indigenous legal departments, you know, not that that's the best way to go about it, but if it's known that people can't harass us without federal authorities getting involved, more commonly known, then we will have more access. We will have access to our treaty rights and to a means of feeding ourselves and not wasting our wealth that we're trying to build on expensive foods, because it's you know, not everyone knows this, but a lot of grocery stores around reservations or within reservation areas are far more expensive than local areas, you know.
And they're more convenience store types than a full grocery store. And based on that point that you're just raising right now, I do want to mention that I did reach out to the United Nations and UNESCO. There's a secretary of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples. These are organizations that are in place, but when you go to phone call and to be in touch with them, it's red tape, nothing but red tape. So I'm hearing, and I have been also feeling that we need a revisit. Why were these treaties put in place for them to just not be honored? It's like lawsuits that have been won and the people haven't received their money when it's a big conglomerate or a corporation that has been sued. So all of these points are valid, and the real condition, the real situation that most people experience. So while we are having this conversation about land back and land access, and we acknowledge that we have been told that there are lands that are available that are being turned away because there's not a management plan. Well, here on this panel are 4 people present who are willing to put feet and information forward in suggestions in stewardship and the options that are already in place that should be utilized further. So the purpose of this panel, in addition to just digging deeper into this conversation, is to pitch that there are people, there are processes in place, and as a panel moderator and member myself, this discussion has brought to mind that as humans, as people, as society, we need to go to the next level of holding accountable those that say that they have put laws in place. Jerry touched on that in one of his discussions in asking those legal questions and taking a deeper look at what can be done next when the ball has been dropped by the governments that be. There is a question coming in from the live stream. What are some of our favorite resources to point people towards to begin to learn more about the issues we discussed today? And do we have any favorite books? Another question posted is, can you recommend any resources for folks to learn more about fishing treaty rights in the Great Lakes?
I'm trying to think of the one. Well, actually, there's a lot of information about commercial fishing in the Great Lakes, because that's actually what brought a lot of European immigrants here, and that's why it is actually economically what brought a lot of the first economic boom of Michigan. So there was a lot of Native American, but very well known and reliable and sought out Native boat builders throughout those times as well. So that's a really important historical thing that isn't always acknowledged. And in fact, most of the largest boat building companies now that build yachts, like Berger, and I'm trying to think of a couple other ones, are which could have been Native companies if there wasn't racism. You know, if they didn't possibly steal, trying to think of the words, idea property. Who knows? Some of the early engineers of some of these companies could have been Native American boat builders because we knew these waters. You know, the Great Lakes tugs are a specific design that you can't find anywhere else, and they're built to run these waters through the rough seas. Where during rough seas here in the Great Lakes, freighters are known to be busted because of the frequency of the waves, versus the ocean where they can ride it out. Our waves hit, a second, every second or so. The Great Lakes history around fishing and our people's means of navigating our waters, that history is, potentially endless. There's obviously over 7,000 years of us running these waters, where freighters from the ocean can be capsized, to today. I've participated in a few conferences around treaty rights that were hosted by non-Indigenous people. However, I would say CORA, the Chippewa Ottawa Resource Authority, CORA, is the federal authority that licensed me as a commercial fishing captain, and basically any treaty fishing person under a federally recognized tribe. If we want to participate in our treaty rights, we have to get licenses through CORA, and register our vessels and get identification numbers for those vessels through CORA. So that's another level of inability to access our treaty rights easily. If you want to just have a boat, a canoe, a G-man you built with some nets you made to go get fish, the way our ancestors have gotten fish here for, over 10,000 years. They found stone circles underneath the water from, when this was all valleys, and the islands from were, mountaintops. We don't have true access to our rights to fishing. I have to get all these levels of registration and federal acknowledgement, and permits and licensing to just practice my rights on any level. So CORA, the Chippewa Ottawa Resource Authority, is the governing authority that you could contact for all sorts of information, especially if you were going to compare levels of fish that Indigenous people pull compared to state license operations. You could contact CORA, because we have to submit a lot of documentation of all the species that we catch on top of the poundage to CORA. So every month I have to submit like 3 forms every month when I'm operating. So they know how much fish we're pulling out in the species. And so if you were going to FOIA the DNR to see the state-run pull through all of their operations, private and state-run, because those might be 2 levels. It could be a state operation that contracts a private operation and licenses them. But I know just from social media and going to fish producers conferences that the state operations and non-native fishing operations use destructive fishing means as well as pull out millions of pounds and you know, tout that, you know, brag about it every year. So yeah, and Cora could also probably direct you to all the different tribes that operate, as well as maybe some Canadian Indigenous fishing people. I know that in the Great Lakes, there's a lot of other Canadian operations as well. Talking to people in the network of the like fish production industry.
Nice, for taking that question. One book that I recently enjoyed was the Hopi Survival Kit. And it is good. It's a great read for anyone, Indigenous or not, because seeing as how we're all here on Earth, we are all in this situation together. And the tensions that have been long-standing, and they take on different features and highlights at different times of history, but we all are aware of the issues that are the underlying sore. So it's definitely time for all of us to take a look at these concerns and to have each other's benefit on our heart, and the equality of the right to live. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and for all of your input and your efforts and your care and your stewardship and raising the young ones and taking care of yourselves in all the ways that you do. Thank you for being here with me. And for those who have any further questions, please do feel free to drop them in the chat. This video will be on the myths.org website, so we can continue to touch base, and there will be future conversations in regard to this progress and process. It is something that's prophesied, so I'll just call it like it is. It's going to happen, and may it be a positive and a beautiful process. And I believe that is where we can leave it for today, unless there are any other questions, anything else, any comments, last comments that the panelists have.
Yeah, there's a lot. Again, these conversations are deep and wide, but I just want people to try and remember that when we talk about justice, when we talk about social justice, when we talk about environmental justice, don't fall into the same trap of forgetting about us. You know, don't forget about our people, which is typically what happens. You know, we get written out of history. That's why I was trying to think of some books based on that question, but a lot of them are very biased. And I you know, in thinking about, don't forget that when you're going to be dividing up land again, don't forget whose land it is, right? Mm-hmm. Don't continue the removal of our people from this place. And so if you want to call something justice, then, you know, we have to be a factor in that equation too. And I don't know if you wanted to sign off on anything. Katie's ready for a nap because we were able to eat while we were talking too. And we still got way more work to do. So sap is starting to flow up here. So miigwech for the panelists that were with us as well. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you. So miigwech, meet you.
Miigwech, Abdi.
Yes, miigwech, everyone.